Hi, my name is Nick Leininger. Going to be recording a quick video about cognitive assessment tests for employment, for job opportunities, and why I think that they are not particularly ethical, especially for those who have a language-based learning disability. I first encountered these tests around the time I started first applying for full-time jobs, close to the time around when I was graduating college in 2017. And the organization that I came across the most was one called Criteria Corp. And so I'm just going to walk through their website briefly and show you what I've encountered throughout these tests. So this is the Criteria Corp website. You can see here that it has some pointers for how to prepare. Their assessments are based on what they, distinguish the individual's cognitive aptitudes. And then it has some other personality questions as well. I've taken this test probably over a dozen times over the course of my career in predominantly business development roles. I'm not entirely sure why people use this test. Personally, I found that the questions were not relevant to the role I was doing, being that in business development, I would be speaking to people over the phone and occasionally drafting emails. Of course, there were other technological efficiencies that I would gain over time using CRM systems such as Salesforce. And so here is a screenshot I have from a test I went to take back in 2020. I spent most of 2020 unemployed. And when I was getting to the final interview process, I'd done about 6 interviews and I did a case study. I did a written assignment, research assignment. So I thought I was pretty much through the interview process. And then I encountered this test once more. So here it says that this test is going to assess my cognitive ability. And at this point, I'm convinced that, well, it looks like this test is going to determine whether I get the job or not. And then I'm going to pull up another screenshot here. And yeah, so here it has a little bit of a description of the aptitude test, problem solving. The types of questions on the test are randomized. I remember encountering a lot of math problems. They had these pattern recognition questions where they would show a series of shapes and you have to pick which shape will come next in the sequence. Also a lot of spelling and word problems where they would show a series of words and you have to select the one that is spelled incorrectly or the word that is spelled correctly. And sometimes they'd have words backwards or forwards and you have to distinguish. And personally, I remember seeing these type of questions thinking to myself, wow, this would be a very difficult test for a person with dyslexia to take. I personally do not have dyslexia. I have auditory processing disorder. And being that this is a timed test, I felt like I had to rush through it. And you only get points for questions you got correctly throughout the test. It's a 2-part test. Here's another screenshot that I had from when I took it last year. 15 minutes for aptitude, and then the remainder is a personality test, which also I thought was a bit frustrating because I feel like they can gauge my personality through the interview process, not through a series of questions. But I imagine the reason that Criteria Corp becomes implemented is to just narrow down a company's applicant pool. I know a lot of staffing agencies use Criteria Corp. I personally don't think that these tests are ethical, and I have no problem, doing some type of addendum throughout interview processes. But personally, I don't think that these tools are necessary. So as I continue to scroll here, this is the Criteria Core website. And I think it's also worth mentioning too, like when someone is in a job search, they typically are applying for a job because they're in between jobs, so they need income. And they've probably done a lot of preparation for other aspects of the interview. It really doesn't seem to me like this is something that um, should be used, especially if you're someone like myself who required 50% extended time in higher ed. Due to my auditory processing disorder, I process information slower, especially verbal information. But even when I'm reading, I hear the words in my head, and so sometimes I need additional time to process that information to make sure I'm deciphering it properly. So it has some information about when they were founded. But let's say I wanted to ask for accommodations on the test. The only sort of contact page I was able to find here was down at the bottom. It has the sales and support. Here we have the phone number and an email that I can reach out to. But normally, when I receive this test, they say that I have 24 hours to complete it. So unless somehow the person gets back to me in real time, I wouldn't be able to receive accommodations for this test. And I really wish there was a way I could show the specific questions that the test includes. But of course, all I was able to gauge were those screenshots. And so this is just something I wanted to point out. The other thing that's interesting, I found another article here. Whoops. What happened? Did I lose my recording? Is it still recording? Should be. Okay. I don't know what I did just now. I'm sorry about that. They do have something on their website here about the American Disabilities Act, which I found fascinating. I need to stop share. Hold on, pause. Yeah, resume. Okay, yes, this is what I found also on the Criteria Core website. So they have a little description of the American with Disabilities Act. So I find it interesting that they have this on their website, but yet they don't have anything about accommodations for those with disabilities. But they clearly have, information about when it was passed, talks about background checks. Says that tests that assess mental or physical health should not be given prior to an offer of employment, as they may run afoul of the ADA. But if you have someone who's dyslexic and you're asking them to look at a series of words and select the words that are spelled incorrectly, or you're jumbling words and phrases together, that seems like you're essentially running a foul test for a person who has dyslexia. And I really think that if you're testing someone on the basis of the role that they're going to be carrying on in their new potential position, that test should be based on the job itself, not a series of randomized questions and things that are completely independent of what they would be doing in their actual job. So, I'd be curious to see if there's ever been legal action taken to Criteria Core. And what I can say too is, last year, it took me a very long time to find employment again. I got laid off in April of 2020. Spent 8 months, in the DC area. I was able to file for unemployment, luckily, but it was a very competitive job market. And I encountered this test all the time. And there were many times where I would get to the final interview and they would say, take this test. And then they'd say, oh, sorry, you didn't test high enough on the test. And it was pretty devastating. And I just felt like there were so many barriers to me entering the job market again. And I remember towards the end of 2020, around the time close to the holidays, taking this test, just being so incredibly nervous. Like, I've gotten this far. They're interviewing a lot of other people, and they said, okay, it's between you and like a few. They, ended up selecting me, luckily, but I don't think that this test should have ever been in the picture, to be honest. But I imagine the main purpose is just to be able to narrow down an applicant pool, and I understand that. But at the same time, they had already narrowed down applicants through the interview process, because they told me that I had gone through the final interviews and then had to do this at the very end. So I'm not sure if the HR of that company kept my test results on file somewhere for any particular reason. But this is just kind of a little overview I wanted to do on the criteria core test specifically, and talking about my personal experience, but also why I do not believe that this is ethical, especially when those with learning disabilities are taking a test that in many regards can be almost tailor-made against them. Like the math questions, what if you're a person applying to a role that has nothing to do with math, but you have dyscalculia? Or what if you're in a role that you're not going to be required to read and misconstrue words and decipher proper spelling, but you have dyslexia, and so then you perform negatively on those type of questions. So yeah, personally, I'm going to do more research into this organization, but I do think that these type of tests should be really eliminated from the job application process.